A good book is the precious lifeblood of a master spirit, embalmed and treasured up on purpose to a life beyond life, said John Milton. A good book can be a classic, a thriller, or even a self-help book, but not necessarily a bestseller. But for a generation brought up on a diet of Harry Potter and Twilight and so many others, is it only numbers which matter? Are we becoming a bestseller generation? To discuss this, we have novelist and short story writer Shashi Deshpande. She has authored 9 storybook collections, 11 novels, and 4 books for children. 3 of her novels have received awards, including the Sahitya Academy Award for That Long Silence. Her latest novels are Small Remedies, Moving On, In the Country of Deceit, Ships That Pass, and If I Die Today. Many of her short stories and novels have been translated into a number of Indian as well as many European languages. She has translated 2 plays by her father, Adya Rangacharya, as well as his memoirs from Kannada into English, and a novel by Gauri Deshpande from Marathi into English. Apart from fiction, she has written a number of articles on various subjects: literature, language, Indian writing in English, feminism, and women's writing, which has now been put together in the collection Writing from the Margin. Best-selling author, jet-setting commentator, and honest critic Shobhaa has spent the last few years in the pursuit of her first vocation, journalism. Her columns are ubiquitous, appearing in nearly every newspaper and magazine of note. Her latest, Sejji, has been declared this season's hottest seller by the book trade, similar to her 17 other books which have all been bestsellers. She's never had a book which has not been a bestseller. Ashwin Sanghi is counted among India's highest-selling English fiction authors. Till date, he has written 3 novels, all bestsellers: The Rosable Line, Chanakya's Chant, and The Krishna Key. Ashwin is an entrepreneur by profession, but writing historical fiction in the thriller genre is his passion and hobby. When he isn't churning out bestsellers, he works for the M.K. Sanghi Group. Ian Jack is a British journalist who was the editor of the literary magazine Granta. After working on several newspapers in Scotland in the 1960s, he worked as a journalist at the Sunday Times, where as a foreign correspondent, he discovered his love for India. He was a co-founder of The Independent on Sunday and edited the paper for a few years. A contributor to The Guardian for many years, Mr. Jack currently writes a weekly column and other articles for the newspaper. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2009. He also writes periodically for The Telegraph, Calcutta. He has also published a collection of essays and writings titled The Country Formerly Known as Great Britain that has been widely acclaimed. Morpheusal Junction, a collection of his thesis papers, were published this year by Penguin. And the moderator for this discussion is Ms. Karthika V. She's a publisher and chief editor of HarperCollins Publishers, India. I request Madam Karthika to take over the session. Before we start the session, we also have a book launch. We're very honored to launch Shashi Deshpande's new book, Shadow Play. I request the dignitaries on the dais to formally launch the book. Shadow Play is a masterful meditation on kinship, marriage, ambition, and the changing face of urban India, filled with a memorable cast of characters. It also tells the story of Kasturi trying to find understanding and peace after enduring extreme cruelty and heartbreak. Kalyani, who atones for the wrong society deals its women by an act of generosity in her death, and Gracie, Tressa, and Ramu, a family torn asunder by a senseless act of violence. In Shadow Play, one of India's most respected and accomplished novelists has produced a work that is deeply humane and contemplative, as much about the ephemeral nature of human life as it is about the enduring relationships that give it meaning.
The idea of bestsellers. So that's why we're here. And as you can tell, there could potentially be a division here because there are 2 people who were described as best-selling writers, and there were 2 writers here who were described as literary writers and not as bestsellers. So, having said that, I think we should just start from what Shobhaa called the publisher's perspective. Just for a minute, I'll give you a scenario. There is a book that has just come out. It's come out, it has just been published. It's in the publishing house. It's fiction. It's by a writer who's never written before. But this writer is probably well known. This writer probably has a lot of people on their Facebook and Twitter followers. This book is going to be visible. It has enthused the sales team a great deal. Marketing has a big budget for it. And everybody knows the book is coming. On that same day, you might have a book coming out which is a hardback, where the paperback of the previous novel was published at some 150 or 199 rupees. This is possibly rupees 499. It's written by somebody who's never written a novel before. It's probably a journalist or an editor or somebody very high profile in a very different way and who does not care to be on Facebook. The sales team is not so enthusiastic. The marketing team has no budget. The editor champions the book. The editor says, this is the most brilliant book that was ever written. This is how two categories of books go out into the market. The same effort has gone into them from the writer and from the editor and from in every other way. But what goes out with a very different message. And I think that's where possibly the streams differ. And that's what we're going to talk about. Where does it start? Where does one become a bestseller? Or, most controversially, are all good books destined to not sell? And are all bestsellers necessarily bad books?
Well, you've given everybody a very clear picture, a picture which we authors always had, but I think the general public didn't. I think a bestseller is good for everyone. I mean, I'm going to surprise you all by saying that. But it's good for the publisher, because actually good for all authors, because we want our publishers to do well. We want them not to go out of business. We want them to go on publishing. So therefore, I think a bestseller is extremely good. But what is a bestseller? What kind of a bestseller? I think I would sort of zero in on that. So there are all kinds of bestsellers. Now you take a book like, say, the Bible, or take Agatha Christie. Some of these books have been selling through decades, through centuries. And if you take the total number of books sold, I'm sure they'll beat all these so-called bestsellers of today hollow. But they are not bestsellers because they are not being sold in a very brief time. So I think it's very important that a bestseller should sell fast. And that the bestseller writer has to keep on churning up books. I think this is what is a little troublesome for me in the definition of a bestseller. Actually, there are so many genres. We don't need to categorize fiction, but we do. There's literary fiction, there's romance, there's adventure, there's mystery, crime, etc., etc. But I think a bestseller cuts across all of them. Any book can be a bestseller. So I think Karthika has given us a very clear picture, but I used to always think that books have their own destiny. I never thought of marketing. Yeah. I think I was, living in some other world. So I thought books have their own destiny, and you write a book, you write it to the best way you can, you put your heart and soul into it. It is your book, the one you wanted to write, and when you finish, you think that you have done what you wanted to do, and you send it out. And then it's up to Dame Luck whether it does well or not, but no longer so. It's marketing. So, I think that is the one single factor that creates a bestseller, according to me.
Frankly, it's a question that's bewildering. Does any writer, published writer, want to write a dud that doesn't sell? Do you not write to be read, to start with? Marketing is something else. But to somehow make the bestseller almost like, it's like a badnaam thing, like you're giving it a bad name. If you're a writer of bestsellers, then you can't be a good writer. I mean, these are things which I find a little ridiculous. It's like the whole controversy and the debate over good art and bad art, and who decides? At the end of the day, it's only the reader who decides whether they want to pay good money to buy that book. Now, if readers consistently want to buy a book, it could be 50 Shades of Grey, which has been a worldwide phenomenon. These things cannot be manipulated. It's not because they knew who the writer was. Even the content is, it's you either love it, you find it erotic, you find it a turn on, or you find it rubbish, and you keep wondering how are other people reading it, but you're reading it yourself, and you're saying, oh my God, I can't believe that the book is done as well as it has. It's a phenomenon. Now, whether that writer even knew that she was writing a bestseller, I would doubt it. It was a writer. I don't think the Harry Potter book started off with the writer saying, I'm going to write a bestseller. If it was that easy for writers to manipulate readers, I think we are actually insulting the reader. As Shashi rightly said, you write the book that is within you. You write it, you put a lot of work into it, you invest a lot of yourself, you face the critics, you face your readers, you face a very competitive marketplace. But at the end of the day, it's the reader who determines whether the book is a bestseller or not a bestseller. No amount of marketing, the smartest marketing in the world, can actually sell a dud. It simply does not. You can't sell a bad movie because you put a lot of money into it. Similarly, you can't sell a really, truly dreadful book, no matter how much money you are willing to put into it. A few readers initially may pick it up because of the hype, but eventually it's word of mouth. And as we all know in Bollywood, by Friday evening, especially because of social media platforms and Twitter and instant opinions of your viewer, you can finish off a really big ticket movie right there and then because the viewer decides. So you can't manipulate the writing of bestsellers. If there was such a formula, we'd all be writing bestsellers because, like I said earlier, no writer writes because with the intention that, oh my God, I've written this absolutely brilliant, genius book, and I hope it doesn't become a bestseller. I hope only the literary critics read it. I hope only the elite select few read it, and they give me enough praise so that the numbers don't matter. I'm sorry, the numbers matter. The numbers matter to publishers, they matter to readers, they matter to, most of all, to the writer. I think so. So I'm just being very candid. No one sets out to write a bad book or a book that doesn't sell.
I was rather naive when I came into publishing. I came from journalism, and you might think that journalism was a more cynical profession than publishing. But in fact, it may well be cynical. But what surprised me, and what I was completely unused to the idea of, was the marketization of what I was writing or publishing. And marketing in publishing is a huge aspect of it. I mean, I agree with what Shobhaa said. You cannot market a dud if it is a dud. But nonetheless, publishers take it very, very seriously. And that was a complete surprise to me. I had no idea of all these meetings one would have to go to all the time to do with what the cover would be like. So you can lead a horse to water, and you can hope that it drinks, but you can't absolutely guarantee that it will drink.
Can I ask Ashwin a more targeted question since we've got to this point? Which is, when Shobhaa talked about writing the book that you really want to write, you have often said that actually writing is far more scientific than that. And when you write a novel, you plan it, you look at what your target audience is, you figure it all out, you have post-its on your wall which tell you which direction to go, and then you write that book, which is a very different process from what we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So how much of this is very different in your creative process and in the way you look at the market?
Well, honestly, I feel that the target market and audience should not form a part of your thinking process when you're writing. Because at the end of the day, if a story excites you, you need to write it. And the moment you start thinking about market size and whether the audience is going to like it, you're not going to end up doing justice to what you want to write. So the way at least I like to think about it is wear your writer's hat while you're writing and then put on your marketing cap after you've done the job of writing so that you can do the best job that you can in terms of marketing it. Having said that, I think to a very great extent, I would love to rationalize. And now having the luxury of 3 bestsellers, one would love to say, oh, I did that, and that made it work. The honest-to-God truth is one doesn't know. I mean, I'm reminded of a small anecdote. An old family friend of ours used to sit down and have a drink with my dad, and he would always, after a few drinks, he would say, oh, you know, son, 99% in this world is about luck. And I would say, uncle, but what about the balance 1%? And he would say, oh, that's called bloody good luck. And honestly speaking, that bloody good luck factor is very critical in a bestseller. And I'm not being modest here, but it's the truth.
I was going to say,
I'm not being modest, it's the truth.
But you work really hard on the marketing and the sales. And I don't think that is a conversation that we're going to get into with them. So why don't you tell us the steps that took you to bestseller state?
Well, I don't think when I started out with my first novel, I honestly was completely, babe in the wood, as it were. Didn't know anything in terms of what I'm supposed to be doing. But by the time that my second novel happened, I had understood. And one of the golden proverb in Hindi is "Jo dikhta hai, wo bikta hai." And it's so true. A lot of people now ask me, Ashwin, what makes a bestseller? I said, you want to be a bestseller? Step one, become a bestseller. It's almost a catch-22, a chicken and egg story. Because there is this virtuous cycle which kicks in once you're a bestseller. Because you end up getting bought by the store managers. Merchandising begins to pick up your title. You are there right up in front on the display. Online platforms begin to publicize your book. So what ends up happening is that it's a bestseller which ends up becoming a bestseller. It's almost like a cycle which with every phase, you're improving your chances of being read. I think this debate about what is good fiction, I'm in total agreement with Shobhaa on that. The reality, there was Mark Twain who said that a classic is a novel which people praise but no one reads. I'm wondering whether the corollary to that is that a bestseller is a bad book. I don't agree. We are living in a world where the attention spans are very, very limited. A couple of years ago, someone did a study in terms of trying to find out how much time does the average reader actually spend on a book in a bookstore. They found that the front cover was looked at for 8 seconds. The rear cover was looked at for 15 seconds. And the average book is given up on page 18.
See, you know why Ashwin Sanghi is a bestseller. He does the homework that none of the writers I know do before you actually do the book.
Thank you.
So, there.
Thank you.
But there's one very important question that comes up in what you were saying, which is, okay, so a dud will not become a bestseller, but by creating an environment where bestsellers are the books that everybody wants to read and a certain kind of bestseller, are we then driving out the really good books that also need to be read? They may not get that marketing, they may not be as visible, but don't you feel that there is a need to also keep that space alive and thriving?
The fact of the matter is, if you simply take the entire universe of books, 2 years ago, Google did a study to find out what was the total universe of books. It's 129 million unique titles. And with the self-publishing revolution that has happened, about roughly 12 to 15 million titles get added every year. If you even take the AC Nielsen in India of the top 250, you will find that there are only 30 titles which actually cross 500 units a week. The balance are all in the double digits, not in the triple digits. So what it tells you is that the long tail of publishing is very, very long. It's just that those individual titles don't get spoken about, but they do get consumed. And as a group, they constitute a very large number. So it's not as if only bestsellers are read. In fact, the larger chunk is non-bestsellers. It's just that the bestsellers occupy mind space.
No, okay, I need to get you into this. Yeah.
I've been wondering whether I should go back home, but I think I'll stay. I think I'll stay on and argue with this young man. We have been talking as if you have to defend bestsellers. You don't have to. They have their place in literature, and bestsellers, like Shobhaa said, are not necessarily bad books. I think it was Somerset Maugham who said that I'd like to meet the critic who will tell me why I'm read by so many people for such a long time, and in spite of that, I'm not considered a good writer. There was Graham Greene, who never got the Nobel Prize because he was popular, he was read. It's not because, he was not qualified, but because they thought he's a popular reader. So I do not agree with that. And Shobhaa, nobody wants to write a dud. Nobody in the world wants to write a dud. So we are not talking about dud books at all. We just put them out now. Out of the other. My worry is, like Karthika said, once she said that you'll go out of the market, the good books. But my anxiety is this. When you become a best-selling writer, your publisher is after you to keep on writing. They would like you to give a book every year. It helps them. You also feel pressurized by them and by the own, you got to keep moving today. You cannot stop there. Then somebody will overtake you. You need to write a book a year. Okay, you are in a great hurry to write your books. I've seen John Grisham, starting from A Time to Kill, which was a fairly good book, to the latest books, which are absolute duds, like Shobhaa said. He's been in a great hurry. He doesn't have anything more to write, but he keeps writing. That's one thing. Number two, I want to say that, language, for example. Language, for example, I grew up reading great writers, and I have a standard of language, which I'm sure many people have, but I see a lot of young people not bothering about it. And for them, I've heard people say that we write the language our readers can read. You're dumbing down language, and you're dumbing down your readers. You're presuming your readers cannot read good language, and I think that's a great shame. It's a great shame. To me, that is the biggest problem with many bestsellers, not all, many bestsellers, And the third thing I would like to say is that, literature has a staying power. This literature is for today, for maybe for tomorrow morning. No more, it's like the paper now. But literature has a great staying power. I mean, why are we reading books which were written 300 years ago? Because they have a staying power. Now, if we have, like Karthika said, if we drive out the good fiction, and when I say good fiction, I'm not saying it in terms of, anybody being superior or inferior, but literature which stays. If you don't have that, 50 years later, this period will be a big black hole. Where are the books?
So then, Ian, shall we talk about the responsibility of a best-selling writer?
Well, I think best-selling writers are very, very lucky people. I don't feel any sense of responsibility to them whatsoever, or I'm sure they're very nice as well. But Shashi raised a very good point here, which is because writing has become a profession in a way that it wasn't before, in the 20th century, I think mainly, writers feel compelled to go on writing. And actually, because writing's a strange thing to do, and because writing, I think, gets harder as you get older, probably, people should stop doing it. I mean, a great many bad books, I think, come out of the declining years of a writer's life. Now, this is a very difficult bit of advice to give anybody, needless to say. I remember one Indian writer saying to me, I said, why don't you just stop writing? You've written all these marvelous books. Why don't you just stop now and relax? He said, but writing is what I do. I cannot not write. Although he had nothing else new to tell us, really. And it was interesting. That was a real dilemma for him. So I very much agree with that point that Shashi made. I think, there's a lot of moaning goes on in publishing all the time, especially from authors. And yet there's never been a better time to be a writer of any kind, an aspiring literary novelist, an aspiring bestseller writer or commercial fiction writer. I mean, the number of titles, as Ashwin pointed out, is tremendously large, and you can publish in all kinds of ways. The problem is getting noticed, and perhaps there are just too many books for us all to notice. We hit on things by accident. My daughter, who's 21, reads books I've never heard of because she reads them on Kindle, online, and she reads recommendations from other writers. Therefore, there's a whole school of literature out there which I know nothing about. I mean, there's mainly crime fiction as it happens, but I know nothing about it. And also the idea, just to come back to you again, Shashi, that yes, literature survives. The trouble is we don't know what literature is until it's been gone 50 years. I mean, P.G. Wodehouse, had he been unlucky enough to be alive now, would never have won the Booker Prize. Conan Doyle would never have won the Booker Prize because they would not have been seen to be sufficiently literary. So I think, there's this idea of good books for the moment and good books for all time. The trouble with the all time is that we're not living in it, and we don't know which books will survive and which won't.
Shobhaa.
The interesting part about the marketing of books, and today all writers are necessarily forced to assume a role that they didn't even 20 or 30 years ago. All writers are expected to be performing fleas and participate in the marketing of their books. It didn't exist 30 years ago, certainly. But times change. The trade has changed. The requirement of the market has changed. And this was something that I realized when I was sitting next to a spectacularly successful writer like yourself, Amish Tripathi. And he asked me a question very seriously. He said, have you gone and met the manager of every bookstore in Mumbai? Do you know the names of the guys who place the books in a certain way on those shelves? Do you have spreadsheets that track sales? Do you visit? Yeah, honestly. Yeah, Shashi, you're ready to go home, right? But he asked me this in complete seriousness, and he was alarmed that I've never done it. Then it occurred to me that there was another young man, also very successful, who shall go nameless right now, who asked me once with an equal amount of seriousness that once your book is published and you know that it's done well, do you send laddus to every person in that store who has promoted your book? Because he said you don't realize how important it is to get them on your side. Because instead of your book being out there in the top 5, he or she could as easily place someone else's book. Then he added something else. This was when alarm bells started to clang inside my head. And he said, listen, if your book isn't number 1 in the first week, don't worry about it. Just go and buy the copies yourself and make it a bestseller. Because at the end of the day, the readers don't know the difference. And what does it cost to buy? Because the differential is maybe 10 copies, 20 copies, 30 copies. And he said you can always then distribute those to your friends. But make sure that on paper and in those ratings and so on, you have the sales figures show that it has sold more copies than anybody else's, and certainly more copies than your rivals. Now, to ask a rather naughty question, have you done that?
A naughty question must get a naughty answer. Recently, I want to just set the stage. First of all, I can say...
The nation wants to know. Yes or no?
I can emphatically state, hand on heart, that I've never indulged in that. But I know that it does happen. Yeah. Now, in fact, it not only happens here in India, but it happens all over the world. There are 2 very recent scandals which came to light. One was the fact that you could actually fudge the Washington Post rankings of bestsellers. And that came to light barely about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where a separate agency was actually approaching authors and saying, I can make your book feature on the bestseller list. And how they did that was by basically going up and buying out copies. But of course, the ratings agencies treat bulk sales as different from retails. So if you can make 100 books seem like actually 100 individual customers, then you can actually fudge the numbers big time, which is what was happening. The second big scam that came to light was the fact that so many authors use agencies in order to write reviews. But because now you have a large amount of online buying happening on sites like Flipkart and Amazon and so on and so forth. And so if you don't have good reviews sitting up there, then it can influence purchasing decisions. My own personal view is you can do all the fudging that you want. The truth is that there are a large number of books which hit that Washington Post bestseller list only to fall off the very next week. The fact of the matter is that you can do great marketing, great strategy, but eventually to sustain it, you need word of mouth. And we are living in a world where your book or your movie gets trashed or made on social media, where people instantly are expressing an opinion, and that you can't alter. It's very difficult to. Unless, of course, you have a very large machinery with a couple of 100,000 Twitter accounts which are tweeting on behalf of you. But otherwise, for normal people, it's not possible. So I think to a very great extent, even if you were able to use some of these methodologies in order to make your book number 1 or figure within a bestseller list, you would fall off equally rapidly in case word of mouth was not with you.
I agree with that. If I can just take a second to say that one of the problems we have as publishers is that long tail you spoke of, that long tail is not supported by anybody. That long tail is particularly not supported by retailers and online retailers. So if you've published a book, say some book is published in the US, and it hasn't got on the top 1,000 on the Amazon list in the first 2 weeks. When you go to a distributor here or a seller here and you say, this book is coming into India, will you order it? They just look at that list and they say, oh, it's not on the top 1,000, can't be a good book, we're not going to support it. Yep. So it's a self-sustaining thing as well. And therefore, while a bad book may not work for too long, etc., it is true that we are very much like sheep in our reading habits in a lot of ways. And once it's on the bestseller list and has lasted there for 4 weeks, by foul means of fair, it is likelier to have a longer life than something that was a really good book and did not appear on that list. So that's where the gray area comes. And I do think it's a matter of ethics as well as responsibility and of literature. I think all of these things tie up together. It's not just about numbers.
I just wanted to say something, a very brief comment, is that no Facebook, no Twitter, no marketing, no spreadsheets, nothing, not even laddus. I'm around, I'm writing. My books are selling. So please digest that fact.
Well, I just want to say, as a member of this very long tail, an obscure member of a long tail in publishing, it's a funny place to be because you're supported. The thing is this, that anybody who publishes a book, I think, is lucky to publish a book. And the second thing is it's kind of hopeless to expect to make any money from it or much fame from it. You're a kind of marginal member of society as a writer, which is fine. I would never complain about that ever. It's a good place to be, as a speaker here said earlier. But there's a conundrum here, which is this. Publishing is said to be everywhere in crisis, which to some extent is true. Maybe less true in India than elsewhere, but it's probably even true here. I wouldn't know. But it's certainly difficult to make money out of books. Literary novels are probably the hardest things of all to get any kind of return on because there's no guaranteed constituency. If I were to write a book which said it was the history of Bangalore, at least people in Bangalore might buy it. If it's a novel by an unknown novelist which has Bangalore as a setting, or not Bangalore as a setting, if it's just a first novel, there's no kind of guarantee of constituency for that. And that makes literary novel publishing a very odd and precarious thing if you rely on it for an income. But despite all this, the number of people who want to be literary novelists in Britain, in America, in Canada, in Australia, the number of creative writing schools that now exist, the number of people you meet who will say, I want to be a novelist, is incredible. And yet, these people are being taught, a bit like kind of members of an ancient guild of silversmiths, say, in Germany in the 16th century. They're being trained for a profession which actually doesn't exist. And I find that quite worrying, and because a lot of people are going to be disappointed.
May I ask a wonderful publisher a question? You're looking scared. No. Writers, are they born or are they manufactured?
Okay, there's a writer who already answered that. Manufactured, I think he said. I don't know about the born part of it, but I do know that the best novels come to us in the best shape. And they remain some of the best books that we've published. The ones that we work really hard on and rewrite from page 1 to the last page sometimes do much better. And nobody ever knows that the writer did not write it all. But there is a big difference that we see. And it's a matter of that second category is certainly manufactured.
And as a follow-up question, that do you think it's going to come to a stage where, like in IPL, we are trading cricketers and we are auctioning cricketers and their talents, that there'll be a scramble for writers and there'll be people putting price tags on them and auctioning them and saying, well, that one had 3 bestsellers, mega sellers. And he's saying, I hope that's soon. Do you see that happening?
I think it's
writers being sold and bought and sold from one publishing house to the next, going to the highest bidder, and are we all comfortable being bought and sold?
I would love to be bought and sold. The truth.
I think it's a question of whether you are making the choice on your own.
Absolutely. What you don't have yet here, I gather, in India, is the agent system, because literary agents are you do a bit, but you don't have Andrew Wiley quite. You don't have Andrew Wiley. You don't have a kind of powerful literary agent culture. And when that happens, you'll be bought and sold, Ashwin.
Well, it's
And we
happening
can recommend
internationally
regulation.
all the time. I mean, Wilbur Smith just moved to HarperCollins for substantial sums of money from his previous publisher. Every 2 years, there's a big sale of one popular writer to another publishing house, and the whole thing starts again. Even Naipaul was sold.
Just to go back to the question that Shobhaa asked
I'm
you.
the moderator.
No,
You are the panelist.
But
I get to ask the questions.
I have to get my words in edgewise if possible. That there is that bit, which is the creative bit, which I don't think is manufactured. No. But there is a bit which is also the craft. Yeah. And I think the craft is very much something that is developed along the way.
Yes, it is. And I think editors are there to support that. And what really bugs me as a publisher, though nobody asked me this question, is when popular writers stand up and say, oh, I don't read books. I don't need an editor. What I write is perfect, and I don't need to read anything to be a writer. Now, that's really putting down the entire world of literature, of other writers' craft, everything. And I think that sort of thing should be responded to, and they're best responded to by popular writers who can say, hello, young man, sit down there. Yeah. Let's talk about the fact that you perhaps need to write, and read a little bit more to write better.
But, partly also I'm surprised with the sort of stuff that actually makes it into the published world. And I wonder as to what are the editors and the publishers doing in terms of bringing out some of that
bad.
stuff.
You don't have to ask me.
I can understand that one may use, there's the old proverb which says that easy reading is damn hard writing. But nowadays, people seem to want to simplify and almost dumb down the writing. I don't have an issue with that. What I do have a problem with is poor grammar. I have a problem with a manuscript that has not been even spell-checked. So why is that sort of stuff landing up into the published world and not going through the requisite amount of scanning and proofreading and editing that needs to happen at publishers' ends?
It is happening. But as I said, there are writers who have made it to a point of popularity where they believe that not a word, not a comma should be touched. And I think that is doing harm, not good.
I spent most of my life as an editor, and I think it's true to say you can make a bad manuscript into quite a good book. You'll never make a bad manuscript into a very good book. The craft of editing can cure lots of things, but it can't kind of create a really wonderful book. And I think editing, although I've spent so much of my time doing it, has become slightly elevated in the minds of editors, if I may say that, because of one man, Maxwell Perkins in America, who shortened The Great Gatsby to great effect and did a lot of work with Thomas Wolfe and Luke Homeward Angel. So the kind of cult of the editor, I've often been interested in where this cult of editing came from, but I think it comes from that point. I mean, Dickens and Trollope and George Eliot and Jane Austen and Henry James did not have editors. The manuscript went to the publisher and then it went to the printer. And although the publisher might have said, this would be good if this wasn't here, and I sometimes think, perhaps disloyally to my craft, that authors should take much, much more care over what they write and not rely on editors really to the extent that they do.
Just to add to that, I think the relationship between an editor and a writer is a particularly fragile and delicate and one of great trust. So it's almost like you're trusting that editor with your mind, your imagination, your thoughts. And if that editor and you do not enjoy a good enough rapport, it can do a huge amount of disservice to the book, and eventually then you're shortchanging the reader. So it's not always that you get to pick your editor. And if you're lucky enough to get a good editor with whom you have this wonderful relationship, it generally leads to a better book. But these days, books are not even called books, they're called products. So that is, for someone from my school of writing and from that generation, to have an editor talk to me about a product is a little distressing because, we still value the old-fashioned way of editing. You sit across and you discuss the book, the editor points out what is wrong with it, how it can be fixed, whether something needs to be rejigged, whether there's a character that has appeared and suddenly disappeared. And I have to tell you, it's one of my early books, but you were not the editor on it, so you're absolved. Many, many years later, in French translation, the editor of the book in French drew up a chart sheet and said there was a character who appears on page 33 and is not heard of after that. So what happens to that character? And that book has gone into so many translations. Nobody had caught that there was a character who had suddenly disappeared. Even I hadn't caught it. None of the editors in India had caught it. And I said, that is the kind of scrutiny and that's the kind of investment editors bring to the book, and how they can really add and make the book a much richer book than it was to start with, because you are writing and it's almost like you're writing at a ferocious speed sometimes, because you want to tell your story, you're in a rush to tell that story, and some of the details sometimes escape you. So suddenly you're on page 240 and you've forgotten a minor character. That's a job of a good editor. Now, even good editors are an endangered species, apart from just good writers.
Yes, when you spoke of the relationship between editor and a writer, editors have to pretend to like writers, even though they may not do. And my friend Diana Athill in London was V.S. Naipaul's editor for many years, and regarded Naipaul very highly and edited his books very well, until one day when he produced a book which had a female protagonist, and she eventually decided she'd say something that wasn't just "you're a genius," Vidya. She thought she'd say something else, and she said, "I'm not sure about this woman who's the central character." And as she said later, it was like saying to Conrad, "Lord Jim's a great novel, but I'm not sure about Lord Jim." And Naipaul stalked off, as he often did. And Diana always remembers this as one of the happiest moments in her life, because she wouldn't have to pretend to like somebody she didn't actually like. So I don't want to say that I am lying about when I say I like writers. That would be terrible. But nonetheless, some confection has to go into this relationship.
May I ask if the audience has questions? Maybe we have time for just a few before we wrap up. Does anyone have a mic?
It's not a question. I'm just reminding you that all of us who write in Indian languages, we do not have editors, and we manage. And I think it's very important. We do not have agents. We do not have editors. We still become bestsellers by writing literary stuff, but not in the same sense in which an English book is a bestseller. Thank you.
I agree with Navneeta that there are two different worlds in India, the world of the Indian languages and the world of English. And I think the world of English writing was almost the same as yours. It's changing now because we have a lot of publishers who have come from abroad. And I think it has done us no harm to be more professional. I certainly agree with Karthika that good editors do help you with the book. I like Shobhaa said, sometimes I've forgotten something. Karthika and I once forgot one mistake after the book went into print. We remembered it much later. But having an editor is a great help. I think we do want, I'm not sure about literary agents because that means two obstacles. You first have to be accepted by a literary agent and then by a publisher. But certainly, I think good editors are an asset.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah. I have a comment for Shobhaa Day. I just loved the way you described the editor and the author relationship, because I think it is something everybody will identify with, those who are writing or want to write. And my question is for Karthika. I have always been curious to know what is the process or the thought process of how a publisher decides to pick the author that is published or a new author, because most of the time new authors are always feeling that the manuscript is just lying with the publisher and they are never transparent about their thought process.
I think it's very clear. If an editor falls in love with the book, they want to publish it. That's one clear category of acquisition that we do, where it's just about the content, where it's about sometimes a celebrity profile doing a book that might sell, then you would acquire it for that other reason that it is saleable. but it has to be this or that. Either you love the writing or you think there's a very strong saleable point to this subject or the writer. Straightforward.
Can I ask a question? I hear this bestseller thing. What exactly is a bestseller? I mean, what does it mean? Like, what numbers
Are you
exactly?
talking about numbers?
Yeah.
Well, from our point of view, a literary novel that goes up to 10,000 copies is a bestseller. And if it's a mass market novel, I would say about 50,000 up.
Excuse me. Yeah. Hi.
The figures for literary fiction in the UK are really amazing. I mean, a publisher will think he's doing quite well if he sells 2,000 copies of a hardback novel. That doesn't make it a bestseller, of course, but he'll think that novel's had quite a good reception. So these are very tiny numbers. People often misunderstand what a bestseller in literary fiction, at least in the UK, would be 30,000, 40,000 copies. That would be a really big seller in hardback.
I mean, I think Hilary Mantel must have sold hundreds of thousands of copies, though she's very literary. So prizes are a different part of the conversation, I guess. Yeah.
Hi. First of all, great respect for everybody on the podium. Especially Shashi ma'am, I've grown up reading everything, a lot, I won't say everything, but a lot of your writing. And that brings me to my question, when we spoke about the laddus being distributed or Facebook, Twitter being used for publicity, and that's when Shashi ma'am said that she does not use Facebook or she does not go online, but she's still selling. So don't you think that a lot of this comes from what we've read in our textbooks as a child? Because I became a fan of Shashi ma'am after reading a part of one of her stories in my class 7 textbook, English textbook, and that influenced me. And until today, I read most of her books. So don't you think those influences we've had, even today, 150 years after Rabindranath Tagore was born, don't you think he can be considered a bestseller author in today's context?
That's exactly what I was talking about, books selling, continuing to sell for years. And they're not called bestsellers, because that's a completely different thing altogether. I mean, the author does not get most of the money. The author's dead and gone. So whereas the bestseller author gets all the, the riches right now, today, here. So that's a big difference. And I agree with you that what we read in childhood is what shapes our reading. I think that's a very important thing.
Hello. Yeah. All I want to ask is, I've been reading Kannada books like M.K. Indra's and what's his name? Tarasu. Most of the books, what I've seen is, I'm a Hindi medium student, I've been reading Kannada. We see the steps of the story leading to become a thesis. The story itself will become a thesis. All I'm trying to ask is, can we translate all those language books into English so that we get into a wider audience? The best of Kannada authors. Tarasu, I'm saying.
I want to answer that question from the other side. That having written in English, a lot of people said, well, you're an English writer. I said, no, at the end of the day, I don't see myself as a writer. It's a story. And a story will be appreciated irrespective of the language in which it is read. So, for example, all of my titles currently are getting translated into Gujarati, Marathi, Hindi, Telugu, Tamil, Kannada, etc., etc. Because at the end of the day, I think if you as a storyteller have done a good job with the original language, there is no reason as to why the story shouldn't carry in another language also. And I feel that probably there is a wealth of material out there in our vernaculars which hasn't come to the English-speaking audience. That is where I think...
Translation is a very tricky subject. We do not have enough good translators. There's not very much of a market as yet for translations, because translations are not able to convey the culture of one language into English. Translations from one Indian language to another do very well, but into English they do not do very well, because you've got to be very skillful. So although all of us agree in the literary world, translations are necessary, it's not possible, because somehow or the other they are not able to, have enough good translators in this country.
It is, I think, it's a matter of economics again, that it's not so easy to get the translations out. So you need support, you need state funding perhaps, you need arts council bodies. None of that exists in this country, so it's a hard job.
Can I just add one thing? I completely agree. Literary translation especially needs a lot of commitment and skill to do properly, and that requires money and a kind of dedication on the behalf of the translator that's quite difficult to find in any country at all.
Maybe 2 questions more?
Excuse me. Yeah.
There's a gentleman in blue at the back, or? Oh, yeah. Okay.
My question is to Ms. Day and Ms. Deshpande. In one of the essays by Mr. Anantamurthy, talks about being a writer in India, and he says that once a writer starts churning out bestsellers, and they have to stand up to that mark, which has been created for them. They start bringing about works which, they try to imitate their own style. And that is, in a way, deceiving your reader and deceiving your style of writing also. So how often does that happen when you write? And once you've been branded, a bestseller novelist, how often do you have to stand up to that thing? And how difficult it is to go
Got the
about
question, yeah? Shobhaa.
Well, you've talked about deceiving the reader. I don't think the reader can ever be deceived. So you're insulting the reader by saying, I can manipulate the reader's taste, I can manipulate his or her mind, and I can deceive someone. It's assuming that person doesn't have independent thought to decide. They can as easily reject the book. So it's also not possible to churn out books. At least I can only speak for myself. You can write the book that is exploding out of your head. And that's the only way to write it, frankly, for me. If I don't feel that incredible pressure to narrate that story or make a comment which is in the genre of non-fiction, I simply will not write it. I mean, there's no question of anybody pushing you at gunpoint to write that book. That kind of a pressure shows in your writing at the end of the day. And even if you're writing to the stereotype that has been maybe created for you, and you're writing as a brand, I think the cold-bloodedness of it all eventually comes through. And the reader can certainly see it, sense it, and will have many other options. The reader is not compelled to buy you because you're a brand, because there are thousands of other brands in the market today. It is a very competitive field. Each one of us, I think, is writing the book that's within us and trying to do it the best we can. But it was also addressed to Shashi, so I think she wanted you to respond to it.
I really didn't get the question. I think Shobha's answered it well.
Okay, can we have the last question of all then?
I want to ask a question.
Yeah.
Because everyone is bothering about buying only. Actually, buying itself is not the benchmark. Why means most of my books are bought by the people. I don't know most of the learned and famous authors might have kept those books in their racks without reading that. Means being an author, I am Professor Nanswami, being an author as well as a writer, as well as a poet, as well as a publisher, I have the enough knowledge as well as expense over in this field. I don't think whatever the books they are buying, they won't read. And buying is not only a benchmark. Then another thing, what they bought, what they read, whether they are responding or whether those are influencing or not, we are not knowing. Okay. Means, actually, my book has been written by, introduction has given by your Anantmurthy only. What I am saying here, even that book must be introduced by Kuempu. At that time, I am not very conscious
sorry,
about
can I interrupt you? We're running out of time. So is there a question that you want to ask any one of the panelists?
Buying is not the benchmark.
Yeah, we get that. Fair enough. Buying is not the only benchmark. Absolutely fair.
Well
can we go to the last question? We'll continue this conversation off stage.
How you can create the readers? How you can create the readers?
Fair enough. Last question, please. The gentleman in blue there.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. The interesting point I'm trying to realize here is that selling is the main issue here. I mean, in the modern day and age, you have, your blogging or you can do self-publishing. The question should be, what are the books that make best readers? How many readers do you have, right? Now, I mean, not discounting the publisher in the panel, right? I want to point this question to the writers. What is their concern? The concern is making money, or concern is churning out something that is read by the most people? Because the point is, I'm a software engineer, the best of the software is free, and you will make money.
Right. I think the problem is that you've raised a question which is a whole new conversation in itself. So we may not be able to get a snappy answer to this. So I think probably the best thing we can do is wrap up. Ian wants to respond.
I can't speak for everybody else who's a writer here at all. But I'll just tell you one thing. I think writing is like chipping rocks. It's really hard work. Anybody who says they love to get down to the machine in the morning is probably lying. I find it really hard. It's not a question of people telling you what to write. The question is getting down, thinking about what you want to write, and then writing it, and then revising what you've written. It's not a great joyous experience the joyous experience in writing comes with having written and being asked to come to Bangalore and appear on platforms. That's the fun bit.
Can I just say thank you? And one last point to be made here. I think everything we talked about went back to the reader, to word of mouth. So really, the best way to create bestsellers out of the best books is for you to take that on for yourself and to say, you are going to read and support and campaign for the best books to become bestsellers. And that's the only way it'll happen. Otherwise, we will stay here, not be able to raise the bar. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the excellent panel. Thank you.